Luck is such an interesting concept. We all kind of want to be lucky. And if we are, chances are that we are also more successful in our lives. But how can we actually create more luck? Is there a way for us to kind of influence how much luck we experience in our lives? And what difference does it make if we consider ourselves to be lucky or not? For all these questions, I sat down with Dr. Christian Busch, and he's the best-selling author of the book called The Serendipity Mindset, and he's the perfect person to ask all these questions because he has done a lot of research around the topic of luck and how we can create more of it in our lives. Christian also just actually launched the German version of his book, so I'll leave a link down below if you're interested to check it out. And I would say, let's dive in and let's find out how we can all build luckier foundations in our 20s. So to start off, let's actually have a look at an experiment which showcases the difference between people who consider themselves to be lucky versus people who don't.
They took people who self-identify as very lucky and people who self-identify as very unlucky. So people who say, I'm always in accidents, there's always bad things happen to me and so on. And they pick one of each and they say, walk down the street, go into a coffee shop, grab a coffee, sit down, and then we'll have our conversation. What they don't tell them is that there's hidden cameras along the street and inside the coffee shop. There's money right in front of the door. And then inside the coffee shop, there's an empty seat right next to the corner, next to this extremely successful business person who can make big dreams happen. Now, lucky person walks down the street, sees the £5 note, picks it up, goes inside the shop, sits next to the businessman, they have a conversation, exchange business cards, potentially an opportunity coming out of it. That part we don't know. The unlucky person walks down the street, steps over the £5 note, so doesn't see it, goes inside the shop, orders a coffee, sits next to the businessman, ignores the businessman, that's it. Now at the end of the day, they ask both people, how was your day today? Lucky person says, well, it was amazing. I found money in the street, made a new friend, and potentially a new opportunity comes of it. The unlucky person just says, well, nothing really happened. And that's really what you'll see a lot of times. You can put people into exactly the same situation. When a couple goes to exactly the same event, one of them, a lot of times, is a bit luckier than the other in terms of the people they meet, the things they find, because of their attitude of how they look at life, how they look at situations differently.
And that's a very important part because Christian refers to serendipity as a type of active luck. So he says it's very different from
blind luck. Blind luck is being born into a great family, things that we can't really pick. It just happens to us. That's kind of the lottery of life in a way of birth. That leads to a lot of societal inequality and so on. But then serendipity is active luck. It's the luck we create ourselves. Maybe an example, imagine you're in a coffee shop and you have erratic hand movements like I do. Then you spill a lot of coffee. And so imagine that you spill coffee over someone accidentally. And that one looks at you and slightly annoyedly, but you sense there might be something there. You don't know what it is, you just sense there might be something there. Now you have a couple of options, right? One option is to just say, I'm so sorry. You walk outside and you think, what could have happened had I spoken with that person? Another option is you start that conversation and that person turns out to be the love of your life, your co-founder, you name it. And so that's really what serendipity is about, that yes, there's something unexpected, but you have to do something with it.
Okay, so we can already kind of see that serendipity and creating active luck for ourselves is a bit about how we can react to the unexpected and how open we also are to engage with new or other people. But what is actually really the first step to create more luck in our lives?
Start to expect the positively unexpected and start to look out for it, similar to how you look out for the negatively unexpected, right? So the negatively unexpected, we all do it in a way, right? Like you go across the street when you have green lights and you still look left, right, probably sometimes, because you know that sometimes people just go and take a red light, right? A bicycle might come or a car might come. And so what if we did that for the positively unexpected? What if we looked a little bit more for money in the street? I find a lot of pennies in the street because I look for them. But I mean, pennies don't change my life or cents, but once you look for that, you find it more likely. And I think that's kind of also the key insight from that experiment, to say, once you expect more from a person, that every conversation could be something interesting or every situation could have some sort of meaning in there, it becomes more likely that you find something in that situation that could be there. So I think that's a key step. And once you do that as baby steps, then it happens more often.
Maybe some of you have also already heard of the lucky girl syndrome, where we are basically telling ourselves that we are already so lucky to attract more lucky things into our lives. And I really asked myself, okay, does this actually work? Like, is there any science behind it?
What I've seen from our work is that on one hand, it can be really helpful to think about something positive that you want in your life, because then A, you're looking for ways to potentially get there, B, you potentially put it on the radar of other people who can help you get there. So scientifically speaking, there is benefits to having that sort of kind of like trying to envision something and trying to kind of put it out there, and then in a way people being able to help you do that and yourself being able to help yourself. At the same time, I think it's extremely important to think about that there will be barriers and to not be kind of idealistically optimistic about things, to say, yay, everything will be great now and like I just have to think about it and it'll happen. Most likely not. If you look at what the most amazing people in the world, why they're so successful is because they overcame obstacles, because when they had a vision and then one day it looked like, oh my God, it will never happen, then they kept going. They had the grit, the tenacity. And I think that's really important in those kind of narratives to always remember, yes, it's great if you kind of think about something, but at the same time, also, please, let's be realistic that you got to also think about what could be the barriers and then also how can I overcome them? And that really then builds your muscle for the unexpected, that makes it more likely that you actually get there.
And there's also another point that Christian mentioned, which I found very interesting as well.
We did a study recently with over 30 of the world's leading CEOs, and we asked them, what is it that made you truly successful in your companies? And one thing they're extremely good at is to say, we have a certain vision, a certain idea of where we're going. So if you're the CEO of MasterCard, you say, I want to bring 500 million people into the financial system who were previously unbanked. Or I want to increase our revenues by XYZ% in this and this year, or whatever it is, like some sort of idea of what we want to do in this year. But then essentially, here's the strategy of how we're going to do it. Here's the timeline and everything else. But I'm telling you already now that we will adjust the timeline. We will not get overly attached to how exactly we do it. And so I think it's kind of not over attaching to the plan itself, but attaching a little bit more to what's the kind of setting you're looking for, what's the kind of idea behind it versus the particular manifestation of it.
I like this because I think it takes a bit of the pressure off of us, because this way we just know that we will probably never have full certainty of anything, but we can always have some sort of clarity. Because once we know our goals and our sense of direction with the strategy that we kind of have built up on how we want to get to that thing, we also know that we will probably have to adapt this strategy depending on new information that is coming in. But going back and actually having a look at how we can create more luck, Christian is also saying that we can actually create more of these unexpected moments ourselves without having to fully rely on things that happen to us, but we can actually also create more of these moments ourselves. So a simple and great technique is what Christian calls the hook strategy,
which is all about saying, how do you bring relevant points into conversations where other people could connect the dots for you? So could find unexpected overlaps between the two of you or more people. And so someone who does that really well is Ollie Barrett. If you would ask Ollie this kind of dreaded what do you do question at a conference, he wouldn't just say, I'm an entrepreneur. He would say, I'm an entrepreneur, recently started reading into the philosophy of science, but what I'm really excited about is playing the piano. And so what he's doing here is he's giving you 3 potential hooks where you could be like, oh my God, such a coincidence. Our CEO is hosting piano sessions on Fridays. You should stop by. Oh my God, such a coincidence. My sister is teaching at Humboldt University. You should definitely give a guest lecture. And so the point is we can all think about what are 2 or 3 things in our lives that somehow feel relevant, meaningful to me at the moment, right? I would love to learn more about this, or I would love to find a job in this, or whatever it is. And then just seed that into conversation. And from the most unexpected of places, people will make connections.
And besides the hook strategy and learning how we can better introduce ourselves, for example, that other people can connect opportunities for us, we can also learn to ask better questions.
And that's one of the most interesting ways how we can directly have an impact on our life, and especially also on having more meaningful conversations and more meaningful relationships by really getting away from questions like what do you do, and like things that just put people into boxes, to questions like when you watch the presentation together, maybe in a team meeting, you would say, well, what did you find most interesting about it? What inspired you the most? Or asking people, what is it that at the moment is on your mind? Or just something that is a little bit more about the person, their motivations, their needs, and less about, I want to put you into a box based on your function.
Another great way of becoming more aware of unexpected situations and how you could create opportunities out of those is keeping a serendipity journal where you write down
what were the incidences where serendipity could have happened but it didn't. So what were those meetings where I had a brilliant idea and I didn't bring it in? What were those occasions where I bumped into someone at a conference and I didn't speak to them? And then what is the one fear that holds me back here? And then can I learn to overcome this? So for example, if it is a fear of rejection, can I put myself more into rejection situations? For example, one thing that I found really helpful is if you literally go into a shop and say, just randomly, oh, this looks really great. Can I have a 20% discount, please? And then the person will be like, what? What do you want? And then kind of like, it's unlikely they give you the discount. But funny enough, sometimes actually they give you one because they're like, this was like a very kind of brazen question. Okay, maybe I'll give you that discount because I like you for it. Or people say, like, this is so strange that you asked this. Like, no, of course I can't give you a discount. But then you get, like, the more you get these kind of rejections, the more, to exactly the point you mentioned earlier, the more you do it, the more you get a muscle for it where you're like, whatever, like, what's the problem, right? And so it's kind of really those things in controlled environment, putting yourself into situations of rejection can be quite helpful.
The fear of rejection is always something that can hold us back. So what is actually something that we can do to let go of this fear?
What I've realized for myself is, at the end of the day, I always thought the fear of rejection was the worst thing, like the sting of rejection. But then I realized, no, the worst thing is the regret when you go outside and think you could have done it. So my reframing that I've tried is to say, away from what's the worst thing that can happen to what's the worst thing that can happen if I don't do it. And so that kind of like then in a way develops that bias for action. And the more you put yourself into those situations, the more you also build a muscle for, rejection sucks, but it's not the worst thing in the world. It's like life goes on.
This principle of regret is something that I like to implement in as many situations as possible in my life. And I even go a step further and really question, okay, if my life was going to end soon, would I regret of not doing this right now that I'm currently afraid to do? And if the answer is yes, I usually go ahead and do it. Not all of the time, of course, but I really try to challenge myself and do it then, because the last thing I want is knowing that my life is going to end and I didn't try something because I was afraid to do it, and now I actually am there and I regret of not having done the thing that I was afraid to do. I also ask myself if there's any difference between extroverts and introverts, and if the concept of serendipity is actually easier for extroverts to implement, and what introverts can do to also implement the concept of serendipity.
It's really interesting because, yes, extroverts potentially benefit, right? When you speak more with people, it makes it more likely that there's potential overlaps, and a lot of opportunities come through social capital, right? So different relationships. So yes, on that side, especially as an introvert, I would always think about hooks beforehand already. Like, what is my story when someone asks me, what do you do? That I directly feel, oh yeah, I have an idea of what I want to talk about. So then it makes it much easier to talk with people once you have a certain idea of what you actually want to talk about. So I'm a big fan of all the strategies we just talked about. I think are especially helpful for introverts. And then second, I'm a big fan of thinking about how can I collaborate with extroverts so that they use their superpower and then somehow we both kind of have fun with it. So for example, you will see that a lot of co-founder teams might have a very extroverted person and a more introverted one. The extroverted goes out and like, yeah, boom, boom, boom. And then the introverted helps them make sense out of it and like connect the dots and so on. And so I'm a big fan of thinking about, let's say, for example, you just had a new podcast or a new book out. and then you go to a dinner event. Like, I'm the kind of person who finds it really, really helpful if you directly go to the host and tell them about it and say, hey, I just want to let you know, like, there's the new book and there's the new podcast, whatever it is. And then the host tells other people about it. They were like, oh, have you already talked with Christian? He just had a book out. You should talk. Because they, like, as a host, will have to talk so much with people that they're always looking for what can I talk about. And so if you give them something to talk about, then they can talk about it. So I think it's really kind of this thing of, can we, like, instead of always thinking about how can I only be introverted, extroverted, how can I work with extroverts so that they leverage their superpower?
And lastly,
philosophically speaking, I think a lot of the things we talked about come back to the kind of Viktor Frankl idea that you cannot always choose the situation you're in, but you can always choose your response to it. And that's where our liberty is, and that's where, in a way, our serendipity is.
Thank you so much for stopping by and watching this video. I really hope that you could take away some little bits of it, and that you can also create more lucky situations in your own life right now. Also, a huge thank you to Christian again for coming on here and sharing all of his insights, all of the things that he has done a lot of research about already in his life. So if you did enjoy this video, I would be super, super grateful if you'd hit the subscribe button, and I hope to see you very soon in one of my new and next videos.